Hi, this is Liam Conroy, and this is my presentation on emotions and the learning process. Now, in spite of popular opinion, emotions can actually be beneficial to the learning process. This is similar to how note-taking can help reinforce learning more so than a student just listening to an instructor. Emotions can actually help support a student's ability to remember a lesson. The foreknowledge emotions that we're going to be looking at were compiled by Sylvia in an article from 2018. The four emotions we're looking at are surprise, interest, confusion, and awe. Obviously more complex emotions than just happiness or sadness, ones that are a little bit more reinforcing to learning overall. Surprise, as described by Simons in a study in 1996, hijacks a person's mind and body and focuses them on a source of possible danger. In the classroom setting, surprise can be something such as calling on a specific student, which there has been evidence to support, especially in the mathematical field, that this makes it easier for it to be a reinforced lesson on that particular student. Surprise is also part of an experimental result. An experiment that's being conducted doesn't necessarily have the answer laid out at the end as far as what will be conducted in the experiment. Thus, the student is surprised by the end result. It can also be novel environment or objects that a student encounters when they first walk into class. Either the classroom is set up in a completely different way, or you may be dressed in a period costume relevant to the subject matter that you're teaching at that particular time. Either way, the student will retain a lot more with this difference in routine. It can also be in part of how your presentation is conducted, if it can be surprising. Go ahead and take a look at this video that I have of me presenting to a group of my fellow college peers, and take a look at the audience on the left-hand side of the screen.
Whenever a shark does get close enough to its prey, it extends its jaws away from its snout and bam, captures it. Sharks serve a very...
You can see by their facial expressions that they did have a reaction to the loud clapping noise that I made. This makes the lesson stand out to them. Even though they were paying rapt attention the whole time, that particular part has extra emphasis and impact. In my personal experience, surprise can be created with hidden information as well. I recently did a game in which students were different parts of trophic levels, such as a black bear, or a plant, or a mushroom, and that information was kept hidden from the other students. When they paired up, they would suddenly be revealed as to which part of the ecosystem they were. Overall, I felt that this lesson had been retained really well. Like I mentioned earlier with experiments in general, surprise correlates really well with the scientific method. Again, the end results of the experiment should be the surprising part to a student. Taking a look at things on a more personal level with the student, interest is another emotion that we want to take a look at. Interest is described as an intrinsically motivating form of learning by Sylvia. The first thing that came to mind for me for this as it relates to students is extracurricular activities, things that the student has a choice in that they want to participate in outside of school. These things can be tied into instructional lessons as long as you know them about the student. This ties into relationship building. The more that you know about your student, the better armed you are in terms of reaching them in terms of the subject matter of your class. Obviously, interest can vary between students, but instructors can make tie-ins to make the lessons more reinforcing. Again, within the field of mathematics, this has particularly been shown to have a strong supportive role in terms of student retention of the lessons. In my personal experience, cultural examples have been shown to increase student recall, not only supported by a study, but my own personal experiences as well. The pictures I have here are from specific examples that came up within my classes this week. The pictures on the left depict a frog's tympanum, their outer ear membrane, and a timpani drum, which I used to apply the knowledge to students that I knew had a musical background. On the right-hand side, I have root nodules that have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria that are used in the nitrogen cycle that I was describing in my ecology class. Knowing about current films and the interest levels of my students in classes, I compared this to the alien symbiote Venom, the character of a Marvel movie that was coming out within a recent time frame that again shows symbiosis, in this case between an alien life form and a human being. These sorts of key references can be used to draw upon the knowledge of the students that they already possess to apply to the knowledge that we're trying to instill with the children. In particular, I teach elective classes, so in that way I have an advantage in that I already am applying to a student's interest because it's a class that they've already chosen. I think if school programs go for more elective classes, student interest may be able to increase naturally. Whenever you see a student present interest in a particular thing in the classroom, go ahead and foster it. There's no disadvantage in engaging a student in something that is interesting to them, provided it's not extremely off topic, and it could be a good building point for other students in the class. In my personal experience, to foster the student-to-teacher relationship, I took inventories of students' personal interests at the start of the year to help formulate my plans for later in the year. On the more frustrating end of the scale in terms of these emotions, there is confusion. Sylvia describes confusion as what happens when people are learning something that is both unfamiliar and hard to understand. This gives an opportunity for students to think for themselves. Again, critical thinking is one of the many subjects that is strongly reinforced in the learning plans across the country. There's also evidence that this is tied into self-confidence. If a student is able to work through their confusion on their own, their self-confidence is also boosted. Again, with science classes that I have experience in teaching, this encourages students to form their own hypothesis if you leave it open-ended for them. This can also encourage collaborative learning, which is beneficial for students. If students are able to work through a problem together, they're able to relate their ideas to one another, and sometimes even instruct one another. For students who work better independently, it may encourage independent research from them in order to ascertain the answer to their confusing problem. Finally, our last emotion that we want to examine is awe, a really hard to describe emotion. Sylvia describes it as a state of fascination and wonder, the deepest and probably least common of the knowledge emotions. Awe definitely has an ability to break up a classroom routine, which can maintain student attention far longer than instructional lecture can. It lays an effective groundwork for future learning because it sets a basis that was very awe-inspiring for a student, and thus is something that is more memorable to them than some of their other experiences. In my personal experience, awe is usually evoked when it's something outside of the demographic that a student has seen. Whenever you are looking at something like a zoo animal, chances are that your students may not have seen it, even if the zoo is within their own town, either due to financial constraints or just something not being part of the family's initial plan. In my experience, taking students on field trips to places like this gives them a better sense of size and scope. When you're looking at the world's largest land mammal, an African elephant, the lesson reinforces much more heavily when you're looking at one in person than when you're trying to get a sense of scale not in person. I also try to present scope as in person as possible with other subject matters such as ecology. If you take a look at a recycling vendor, you can see just how much is being recycled and processed within a given day, which gives an impression to students about waste production and waste management. So you may be asking, how can I incorporate these emotions into my own classroom setting? The first place that obviously we laid a lot of groundwork on was through Sylvia's learnings that were presented through the NOBA project through our classroom. Again, the NOBA project has other content that's very worthy of browsing towards this end. There's also an entire chapter from a book written by Konstantin Bratanu on emotional knowledge that's available on researchgate.net. Beyond that, my recommendation as far as what's helped foster me in terms of being able to use these emotions to help inspire students toward further learning would be to do collaborative meetings with your colleagues or critical friends within your school structure. The more support that you can get from your peers in how to engage students, the better. Finally, though extensive, This is the list of resources that I used for this study. Please feel free to pause the video to be able to look at the different works that were cited for this particular project. Thank you for your time.